Then we're live.
Hi guys, welcome to another Glasshouse Sessions. This is a very special episode as we've gotten a guest and we remember to advertise at least one day in advance. So joining us, we have the Cyber-Partisans. We've got BCP1 of Cyber-Partisans, the Belarus Cyber-Partisans, and Yuliana Shemetovets, who is the official spokesperson. So we're going to be skipping a lot of the stuff that has happened this week in general, like the iOS lockdown and so on, because it is less relevant than talking about hacktivism, non-state actors, international law of war, cyber warfare, and yeah, like just the awesome stuff that the Cyber-Partisans have been doing. So that said, I'm not sure. Yuliana, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Yuliana. I'm Belarusian. I grew up in Belarus. I'm now in New York, and I became a spokesperson for Belarusian Cyber-Partisans, I think in November or October 2021, though I was involved with some internal tasks before with the Separative Group. And Separative Group is the alliance that consists of three other divisions. It's Cyber-Partisans, mostly Letiet, which means flying storks, and in as it's people self-defense brigades.
Okay, cool. And like one of the things that we have found super cool about the Cyber-Partisans is that the cyber operations that they conduct aren't, it's not really traditional hacktivism in that you hack something and then you find a reason that you're against the thing that you hacked. That's the usual method. So like the Cyber-Partisans actually plan not just the operation, but also how it's going to be publicized, and that's intended for effects. Could you tell us a bit about that process and just more in general?
Sure. So I guess it depends about the planning. I think when they started operating, it wasn't that thoroughly planned. It was, especially in the beginning when they hacked the national TV in the internet and showed the video clips of people being beaten up during protests in 2020. It wasn't thoroughly planned. It was just a decision to, fight against this brutality that was clearly unnecessary. And then I think by the time they joined forces with people on the ground, with some politicians in the separative movement, then it became more thoroughly planned, though still Cyber-Partisans sometimes act on their own just for security reasons. They can't share all the information. They can't share, all the accesses they have to all the systems. And in that sense, we trust them to make a decision correctly, and we trust them that they're not going to harm us anything, or like citizens. It's like number one rule. They have also like a list of code of conduct, like the list of rules that they usually follow, and one of them obviously not to affect or harm ordinary citizens, and not to use this information for personal gain or for personal reason. But there are some attacks, like let's say leaking conversations that shows how Belarusian authorities wiretap Russian embassy. They found this information slightly earlier. Again, it's really hard to analyze all this conversation. It's like 5,000 minutes. It will take a lot of time to listen through all of it. But they found these conversations, how in embassies, it's clearly showing that some of them were recorded by Belarusian authorities, not only in Russian embassy but China as well. And then they chose the moment when to publish it, just trying to create some tension, even if it a little bit, or some unpleasant questions that are coming from Russian side. While there were so many rumors, and still are, that Belarusian army will join Russian forces in the war of Ukraine. So, in that sense, they chose the moment. They also tried to spread out this information. We tried to reach out to journalists, showing them what's there and asking them, if you want to listen to the originals of these audios, we can share that as well. So again, it depends. Sometimes you can't share this information just because it's so sensitive with not even people from your group. Some you can share, some you plan, some it's more on them to decide how it's better to operate.
Right. And so just sort of on that, I was wondering, like, how many analysts do you have then? Is that a bottleneck that you're facing? Is that something that, like, it seems to me that maybe the actual like hacking is clearly very sensitive and requires skills and such, but someone who can like speak Russian and English, for example, or just Russian and filter out like
And
these are more,
Belarusian.
and Belarusian, yes. Yeah, so like it just someone who can like, I am desperately trying to fuck this up. I'm doing the best I can. You know, I got as drunk as a skunk. I'm hungover as hell. No, none of those things. Yeah. No. Thank you for throwing me off my stride. Anyway,
I know. I mean, you've got this full like interview, like.
No, I'm curious about stuff, man. Like they operate as like, I mean, we can talk about like, do you believe that the international laws of war with non-state actors, the way that cyber-partisans operate is clearly, if they were inside Belarus, that would not be an international law issue. But if they were based outside, then that's different, right? There'd be conducting operations from someone else's sovereign territory. What do you think about that? Do you think that, you know, the EU should be responsible for responding to illegal activity against the Belarus government?
It's a good question. So first you ask about analysts. So yes, there are some divisions. Some people are focusing on hacks, some just analyzing information, some create videos, social media posts and stuff like that. So not everyone are involved with attacks because there are also some foreigners and stuff like that. So not all these people do this. Also, you ask a good question. I also asked this question when I was at this PsyCon event. And I decided that they were discussing, you know, all these laws and rules for mostly state actors during the war conflict, but there, as we know, the non-state actors. So ask Michael Schmidt, who's apparently one of the biggest or best experts in this field. And his response was, it depends. It really depends on the...
He's a lawyer, is he?
Yeah, the lawyer. So you know, there is something about the neutrality that even during the war conflict, and if the country is neutral, they should expose those who, you know, fighting against or are participating in the war conflict. But then some experts, you know, say that it might not be true. We should protect those who even are located in the neutral states. There is still a debate. So there is not a conclusion about what we do with actors that are part of the war conflict, even in neutral state. And, you know, there are many countries in Europe that are not neutral right now, especially those that share borders who had complicated history previously. So, you know, again, it's a guess. We don't know where the cyber-partisans are, and we don't know how European countries would act. And cyber-partisans repeated many times that they only focus on Belarusian affairs and they help Ukrainians. And that's the only thing they do. They don't want to commit any hacktivist actions against European countries, European institutions, infrastructure, even companies that potentially sponsor dictatorship regime in Belarus. It's just not in what they're doing. They don't have any resources, first of all, but also it's not in their plans now or in the future.
Right. So sort of to play devil's advocate, or basically just to be a dick, how is that different from ransomware? Right? Like, in what way does the cyber-partisans, for example, attacking the train network, which was an absolutely epic hack, by the way, how is that different from, say, like Conti or TrickBot doing the same thing to, I don't know, Germany, to prevent, or Poland maybe, because Poland's Poland's logistic network is being used to assist Ukraine. So I like, that seems to me to be the sort of like the more thorny areas.
Yeah, I'll give you a long answer, but before I do this, I'll ask you a question. How are the attacks on military objects by Russians differ from the attacks on military objects in Russia done by Ukrainians? that's the difference. It depends on what side you are and why you act the way you act. During the war, you have to kill also if you defend your land, if you defend yourself. You have the right to do this.
Like, I'm not talking from a moral or ethical point of view, because like I think the answer is very obvious there. Like, clearly the cyber-partisans are in the right. Just more of the like legally, I think that
it is a good question. And we don't have good rules for that. Like, we don't have proper, descriptions on how non-state actors should behave if they find themselves on the correct side. It's still up in the air. We're always open to discussions. We also tried inside our group to come up with some kind of rules, as I mentioned, to just, make sure that everyone follows, that anyone who's new, who joins, they're like, sign up to this, like, yes, that's our rules, and we're not going to do anything outside of what's been discussed and what's been agreed on. And, so far it's been good. Obviously mistakes happen, but since the moment that the group was founded, no one went against the rules that were designed from the very beginning. So I guess that would be the answer. We don't have a set of documents that we can share with you guys and say, we worked through all the legalities. We don't have resources. We would love to. Belarusians is famously known to follow the rules. We love the rules, even being under occupation. Even like when I came to New York, I couldn't cross the roads on the red light, even though everyone is doing this. Like, it took me a couple of years to get used to it. I mean, obviously it's a little bit subjective, but that's kind of a cultural code, and it's like a cultural joke for us. And we would love to, but there is nothing we can follow. There is nothing being created.
Yuliana, just to kind of shift the focus a little bit from the really like abstract sort of cyber policy law stuff, but to like a more local flavor. To be completely honest, I can't speak for anybody else, but I don't necessarily understand a whole lot about the specifics of what's been happening in Belarus up to this point. Like, I think we understand a fair amount about the general conflicts with Russia and some about dictatorships, but like, it's easy for us to make the mistake of overgeneralizing what that situation is as if all of them are the same. And like, do you think you could just kind of give like the idiot American's guide to like aspects of the Belarusian conflict that we're probably ignoring or misunderstanding or haven't even heard of at all? Because I don't want to just kind of like overgeneralize past it in a sense.
Sure. So Lukashenko has been in power for 28 years. He's a so-called president, even though he is not recognized now by any liberal or democratic states. He won only first fair elections that were recognized by other states. And after that, he changed the constitutions illegitimately. He forced some people out of the country. He supposedly was responsible for the death of the head of the he was the general of the country who wanted to start an impeachment process because he made some obvious crimes that went against the constitution. And then that person never been found. He was supposedly dead, and people who worked for Lukashenko during those times, they left and they walked through what happened. There was another journalist who also disappeared during those times, and the head of the election committee, he also disappeared. And when the impeachment process went through, because there were deputies that the congressmen basically who were in support of this case, Lukashenko, because of the pressure coming from this elected congressman, he went to Russia. He asked for support, he asked for money, and Yeltsin, the Democratic Yeltsin, gave full support to Lukashenko. So he managed to keep the power. There were protests in 2006, in 2010, 2017, and sometime in between, where people were brutally suppressed, beaten up, put in prison. None of the elections were recognized. There were imposed sanctions from countries every time after the elections. And I think in 2020, it just because of COVID, Lukashenko never responded well to it. This disregard to what people were asking for, demanded that people wanted to participate in social life, political life, economically. They became so much more independent. It's not a Soviet Union time anymore. Yes, in the beginning, it was such a shock when Soviet Union collapsed. So people probably, not all of them, went out and knew what to do and knew how to, fight for the rights. But then every fourth person in Belarus had visas, went to Europe, saw how other people live, like how systems work. And even though many were apolitical in 2020, it just got to that point when people couldn't be silent anymore. So there were hundreds of thousands of people on the streets protesting the elections that were not recognized and were not fair, like according to many polls. Tikhanovska won. She was the candidate from opposition who went for her husband and stuff like that. But people mostly protested the regime in the first place, then the brutality that happened on the streets. 40,000 people went through prison, tortures, some of them rape. Around 20 people died. Many say that from the regime's hands. Hundreds of thousands of people left the country. People get detained still. It's 2022, and every day I open the newspaper, I see that someone else been detained. Now there's a lot of pressure on activists, parents, families, trying to affect anyone who is abroad. The repressions continue. They can come without any law order to your apartment. They can trash it. They can take you out for no lawful order. And it's still continuing. Obviously, no one's much talking about it. Now the war is going on. It's much worse have things happening in Ukraine, of course. But the repressions never stopped for Belarusians. I mean, they always been in place, but after 2020, I think he kind of opened this box of Pandora, box of violence, and it's really hard to stop it now when especially all these policemen now have power. They can do whatever they want, and they know that they can only act like that under Lukashenko's rule, under Lukashenko's regime. So now they're doing everything possible to keep him in power, because now they're also part of the crimes that the regime committed. Right. So this wheel of violence, it never stopped for us, and it's still continuing, unfortunately.
Thank you for the primer. Like, I know that maybe it's kind of taking 4 steps back, but I think it tends to be
it was a little bit chaotic. I can spend hours talking about Lukashenko and the regime and how he usurped the power and the steps and how he's been supported by Russia. And he's now paying basically his debt to Putin, who supported him in 2020. If it wasn't for Putin, Lukashenko potentially wouldn't stay in power, but he helped him with money, he helped him with people, with propaganda people. He sent so many that now working in media. Like before, we didn't have such a well-designed propaganda as we do have now in Belarus, and it's smartly created for people who are more rational, who are more emotional. It's been designed for different target groups, so much better than it was before. Yet people still watch mostly YouTube, but if we keep this propaganda for 5 years, then they potentially, turn into all the Russian citizens that are now supporting the war, which is really dangerous precedent. And Putin now pressuring him also to join the war. Like we see many proofs of that, and it's very worrisome for Belarusians who don't have a reason to fight Ukrainians. They never had this, notion, as it's been in Russia, that there are some Nazi people in Ukraine and they're so much against Russians. It's never been spread in Belarus like that. We never had problems with Ukrainians, and I don't like this when I say brotherly state, but we've been like that.
For the propaganda, is that being played out on like Western services mostly, or is this just like local?
It's local national TV, but they now also are using YouTube, Telegram. So obviously younger generation, not even younger, like older generation, don't remember the statistics, but now they're using more like alternative social media, YouTube. And they can also find propaganda people there. They can also find their channels and watch them, and they've been advertised. So, they try to gather as much attention as possible.
Right.
It is something that we keep in mind. And I know that many opposition groups working in that direction, trying to either block these channels or try to provide alternative information so people can see what's happening in Ukraine, what's actually happening, or what's actually happening in Belarus as well.
So,
can I linger there with the
Oh,
disinformation, the propaganda there for just a minute? Because it strikes me that a lot of countries, Belarus, Ukraine, et cetera, have been subject to Russian disinformation for decades, for absolutely decades. And while in the West, we understand obviously the kinetic war, we have a fairly good understanding of cyber attacks, and I'll kind of put that iffy. I would postulate that we're far less familiar with the disinformation and propaganda just because either we haven't seen it or we're not aware of it. Do you find it more difficult to communicate that threat to people outside of the area than the cyber or kinetic threat?
I think so, yes, because this propaganda, been in place for many years, as you mentioned, in places like Belarus, Ukraine, and I mean, Russians can be successful in Western countries too. We saw some well-made video clips or even articles in English, not like in Russian or anything like that, that been pretty influential. They, support a lot of like conspiracy theories. I know that in Germany, Telegram being used mostly to spread these conspiracy theories, while for us, it's like the method, how we can get the truthful information. For them, it's the opposite, which is an interesting case. So I think it is well made. It's just, it's not your bubble. It's not you guys who read these articles or this information are exposed to the sites. So you might not be as familiar, but there are different type of people who actually reading them or consuming this information. There are just not as many, but it's slowly spreading. They target also smartly. They target people who are interested in conspiracy theories, as I mentioned, or they think that the rights, their personal rights being under attack in democratic states, or we know that Russian famously support right-wing parties, and people on that side also might get into trap and follow and think that is a truthful information. So I think it also kind of depends on the bubble you live in, and the media bubble. It's much worse still in Eastern European countries, but I think they can be pretty good in Western countries as well.
Yeah, and I find it a little disconcerting. And we spend a fair amount of money, I think, obviously countering the kinetic attacks, and then the easiest way to get money in government or business is to throw the cyber word out there. Yet, despite the pretty dire consequences of ignoring propaganda and disinformation, we don't seem to be making a whole lot of effort in the West to kind of counter that, despite warnings from.
True, but it's also kind of hard to do this. Like you stand, saying that we need to have free speech, and we agree with that in also Eastern Europe and Belarus. And then how would you control that? What would you say is being done by propaganda? What people actually believe in? You can't just shut people up because you don't like what they're saying or what they believe in. You still need to give them the voice and not to isolate. We need to talk. That's another problem that I see also, let's say, in the United States. So I think it's much easier to counterattack cyber attacks than the disinformation. And we're still, trying to find a better way how to oppose that, how to work with that. But it is hard.
Does Cyber-Partisans have connections to anyone working on counter disinfo, or are they working on counter disinfo?
But mostly in Belarus, to be honest. Yeah, the regional group actually split up back in like September or October of 2020. And I know that some people that used to be a part of kind of Cyber-Partisans, a much broader coalition, they now working on the disinformation operations, but they're separate. They might be in touch, but they don't work on any projects together. So that's kind of separate entities. But again, Cyber-Partisans help with the information. I know that there are some campaigns sending out messages to soldiers, their families, of what's actually happening in Ukraine. So Cyber-Partisans provide information where these messages can be sent to. And I know that they conducted a little bit of the campaign of their own, but it's not that big or great, just because we don't have people or resources to do that, but we try to help groups that are doing it professionally. But again, it's mostly targeting Belarusian citizens and Belarusian soldiers or people working for the regime.
Cool. I'm going to read some questions from our Twitch stream.
I know, by the way, I know that my colleague has problems with internet. It's been working and now something's not working. I'm sorry about that, but I know that he's trying to connect.
Forth. They've been able to at least start writing some stuff in there.
Yeah. This is actually a question that I think if they're still around, will have something. Let's see. Okay, so the question is, do the Cyber-Partisans consider their group hacktivists, or do they prefer to define themselves as something else? I think that is the question.
My colleague probably can answer, but I know that, yeah, they prefer to call themselves hacktivists, and I actually correct a lot of Belarusian journalists, the journalists from like Eastern European countries. They're not used to this name. So in Europe or in Western countries, it's much more common to call groups like Belarusian Cyber-Partisans hacktivists, but it's not very, I think, something that people get used to in Eastern Europe. But yes, they prefer to call themselves hacktivists because that's what they actually are. We also I think someone called Cyber-Partisans a digital resistance group, something like that. I think it's also pretty accurate, considering that Cyber-Partisans, it's kind of a unique group. They're not just doing cyber operations. They're now a lot involved, not all of them, like some who are designated people for that, like involved in kind of negotiations between different opposition groups, kind of trying to build up the political movement, trying to build to bring changes, build up a strategy, a common strategy for all the groups in Belarusian opposition, because it's not systematic. System bit system regime is very consolidated, and we need to consolidate our own efforts. So in that sense, the digital resistance group also is a good description of what Cyber-Partisans are.
Very much so. I would ask this question, but I read it and I do not understand what they're asking. It's something about virus, block, ADA, company, defender. Sorry,
also, I think my colleague is writing something. We can maybe see what he adds up if there is something. Sorry, I just noticed this.
Yeah, I think they're commenting on when you were discussing the conflict with disinfo ops from the government and sort of what they're doing on social media.
Yeah, that they collaborate, but I think that I didn't mention properly is that they do make some mass campaigns on messaging and calling people from the regime, maybe not only from the regime, but primarily that's the target. So they did have some mass campaigns.
Right. Okay. So this one I think is, I'm curious as well. To the extent possible, what can you tell us about any attacks that have happened against the Cyber-Partisans? So technical or otherwise, like what resources are the regime using against you? And I assume the Russians are involved and so on. Like, what can you tell us about that?
So far, we know that they try to infiltrate the group. They try to pretend to be volunteers that want to be part of Cyber-Partisans. But as for the actual attacks, we haven't experienced that yet. We don't, we can't be sure that we are untouchable completely, but for now, there are no attacks. Either Belarusian regime just doesn't have capabilities. That's most likely the answer. And also by involving Russians too much, it also becomes dangerous for them because they can have access to all these sensitive databases that Cyber-Partisans obtained. For now, at least, Belarusians have these databases, so it's an internal affair. We deal with each other. But if you invite Russians, they will have some, power over you even more. And Lukashenko, being, close friends with Putin, he also is afraid of him because he knows the risks that he knows that he doesn't do everything that Putin wants, and Putin is probably thinking to also change him. So he can't give him too much leverage. And it's our thinking. It might not be true. Obviously, we didn't get a confirmation from Lukashenko or from regime people, but that's what seems likely, and it just kind of makes sense. But it might change. So we're prepared. We're trying to follow all these safety protocols, existing. And even if they hack my phone, they won't be able to read anything spicy or even get access to like Cyber-Partisans identities.
So I know back when like anonymous and ananops were a thing, like in dealing with infiltration and people trying to subvert the group was an ever-present threat. But I guess just as a general question, like, are there things that you found and with BCP as well, that go to kind of the sustainability for keeping the a hacktivist movement and this type of thing sustainable in like for over long periods of time?
If I understood the question, I mean like follow all these safety protocols, or just operating in Belarus, or
I guess it's kind of like, what are things that have helped make the
to make it sustainable?
Yes.
I guess the stubbornness in general of people who just want to change the regime. It became very personal because everyone's either friends or family member being exposed to the repressions. The repressions never stop. We every day read how a mother who just gave birth was detained, or a person who just speaks Belarusian was detained. It's crazy. You take it very personally, and people just, they can't give up, even though yes, everyone has started. It's been for 2 years, but I think this desire to bring fairness into the country and to punish everyone who committed crimes during the law, obviously through the law system, but still, so they answer for all the crimes. That's what makes the work continuous, even though we don't have any, again, special resources or financial support. I think the war brought also new people and also made people more motivated. Every day you also, again, read the reports. I know that especially in like Western countries, yes, in the first month, it was such a big thing. Everyone reading, New York Times of what's happening in Ukraine. Now people, get into their own lives and it's normal and it's fine, but not for us. We read it every day. We've been exposed to it every day, and you can't just stop doing it while people are dying. And especially when the rockets are flying from Belarusian territory, that it is completely unacceptable for us. So I think the high motivation makes it sustainable, but also like following the safety protocols, trying to be as safe possible and careful as possible, because Cyber-Partisans, they achieved a lot of great things, but again, if they had the resources of like a Western country, they probably could have done more. And also we receive all the time criticism from Belarusian people, like saying, you have to do more, guys, why are you not doing that? And we try to explain, because it takes months of preparation. It's not just entering the network and then just deleting stuff. Also, you need to have all this operation impactful. You need to get to the domain control in order to actually shut down or delete backups correctly. It's just hacking the system doesn't mean that you can put some harm or destroy things completely. So again, also trying not to bring any damage to ordinary citizens, like let's say with the railway systems. It took months and months. So in that sense, the carefulness helps. I guess that's again the notion of like following the rules even within the group, even though we understand it's not a very legal activity. People still try to be careful, because that's a lot of now that there are a lot of risks that we are facing right now, especially when the war started.
That makes a lot of sense.
There was a question in the chat, and I think BCP1 is answering, but they were asking about KIPOD and Synesys and this sort of like facial recognition surveillance system that was developed for Belarus, and just sort of wondering I guess if you're seeing it sort of as a big part of the crackdown, and maybe we can broaden that question to say, to what extent is technology really playing a role in sort of the oppressive side of the Belarusian regime?
Good question. To be honest, I don't know the answer, but I know that my colleague is writing it right now. Do you guys want to share the screen, or do you want me to just read?
It's on the stream, so they can see the text.
Oh, they can see the text. Okay, cool.
We can have these
So we'll
two
just
screens.
feature quietly while everyone reads. Yeah.
I think that the concern around tech, like even us asking about Western services before, and then also sort of, I think the heart of this question is there is a perception in policy circles, in the legal circles, and then in the tech circles that we're sort of looking for where we can affect change or where we can help out. So obviously Western services, you look at something like Facebook, if Facebook is enabling something terrible, I'm sure that we can have discussions with them, or there are people there who care enough to try to affect that. But we're also very curious about homegrown solutions, something like what is being described here, or discussions that we've had about I'm trying to think, it's like Clearview or whomever is selling sort of facial recognition technology in China to persecute Uyghurs. Like there is this question of sort of technology spillover into all these places that are now enabling some of the worst aspects of governmental oppression.
Yeah, and we know that Belarusian authorities collaborate with Chinese authorities. They definitely either were buying or getting some advice on surveillance systems. And then that's when they started building up all these cameras. And as my colleagues mentioned, if the actual activists, like people on the ground, they know how to try to hide from cameras. But again, it's you can explain as much what you need to do, what rules you need to follow, but it's also to people to follow these rules. Let's say in the internet as well, Cyber-Partisans develop partisan Telegram, where it's much more safer for people to use. In Belarus, you can be randomly stopped in public transportation, and then your phone can be searched. And if you follow any extremist channel that they call, it's just an independent news outlet, let's say, you can be detained. So what Cyber-Partisans develop is that partisan Telegram that has some special codes. And if you've been detained, you give the fake code. And then once the policeman enters it, then all your chats that you marked previously are going to be deleted, or all the channels that you've been following will be unfollowed. So it's much safer. But again, we try to advocate, we try to advertise it, but it's also then gets back to people how much, safety measures they want to take. Maybe always say, please use VPN. And then it's on people to actually make an effort and use it. So the same goes with cameras right now. It's all the activists, they know there is also a set of rules how you try to avoid. You wear a mask, you don't look up, you wear glasses and stuff like that. Those especially who are still active in Z Belarus, like conducting some partisan operations. That's the answer, but you can't change anything. There are no legal ways how in Western countries you can complain, you can put it out into media and bring people's attention to that. You can only change this situation after the regime is changed. In general, now you can just try to avoid these cameras and be aware that this is happening, because not many people, again, still aware of how they watch people and what, not only in the social media, not in the internet space, but also using the cameras. Now they're actually going after all the people that went to protest in 2020. Now they had enough time to look at all the cameras, follow all the photos, and they're just going routinely after you. If you went even once and you didn't do anything else, they're still gonna either detain you or have a conversation with you, at least at a minimum. So it is pretty crazy how the technology can be used in our case to fight the regime, but also how these bad guys, the regime, can use the technology in order to survey on their own people.
I mean, it's interesting. I see sort of BCP1 is talking about how they figured out that even the speed cameras were being used consistently.
Yeah.
I love the mention of sort of homegrown technology that's adapted to the realities of the space, right? Like it's something that we talk about a lot because in InfoSec, there's this kind of obsession with the idea that we enable activists and whatnot with things like Tor and Signal and so on. But the practicality of these solutions, even when it comes to more realistic attack scenarios, right? Like somebody stops you, grabs your phone in the middle of the street, asks for your passcode, and then all of a sudden you're screwed because it becomes abundantly obvious that you're following all these things.
You have Signal installed and you use Tor.
Well, not only you have Signal installed and you use Tor, but there's no failsafe for, somebody is seizing my phone, right? Like the idea, fine, like
all of the stuff that's developed for activists is developed for activists in the US legal system, which is incredibly activists, if you are.
They're developed for an activist identity, like when you want to present as an activist as opposed to survive as an activist.
The post to Instagram button is right next to the burn message button, so.
But no, I think it's great. I mean, look at the reality of the situation, right? Like the Belarusian Cyber-Partisans have to come up with their own version of this in order to actually help folks not just like be active, but survive. And I think it is an indictment in a sense of the kind of technology that we're pushing on folks, because if people from Belarus came to the InfoSec community and said, okay, how do we operate? We'd be like, well, install Signal, use Tor, and like essentially signal yourself out as an activist in all of these different ways. It really does, it makes me wonder if any of our projects really are in any way considering the right attack scenarios, not to throw everything under the bus right away, but I am curious, right? Like, is there any bit of technology that, is there an app out of all the ones we use that is in any way built for that scenario? I'm guessing
Telegram.
No.
So
No.
yes,
It's
that's a little bit of an unfair question, right? And so the whole thing about, OPSEC, operational security, is the fact that you don't do things differently than you would otherwise, right? And so it doesn't matter what the technology is, if you don't use it before you hit crisis, right? It's going to be a change, right? Like you have to have used, if you use Signal and Tor on a daily basis, then the fact that you're continue to use it when you're under extremis is not a change. The fact that you only start using those things after the Russians invade your country, that's just poor OPSEC, right? So it's.
I think I'm not describing that so much. Like I get the larger OPSEC bit. I'm just really curious, like when you look at something like Signal, and we discuss this a lot. This is something that, and the Grug has been talking about this in his talks for 1,000 years, which is like, like the idea of the secret volume with the different passcode, or the different passcode to dump all the incriminating stuff. Like that's something that I don't think has been really implemented into any of your Signals, Threemas, even Telegram, which they've had to modify themselves. Like, I think it's awesome that they can and they have, and that it's being adopted, but it also speaks to the inadequacy of our mainstream tech that is supposed to enable this.
Signal took forever to add ephemeral messaging because they kept saying there's no point. If someone wants to read what you sent, they can just take a picture of the screen. And that's not what it's for. Like, the utility of ephemeral messaging is that it deletes things on your phone, not that it deletes things on someone else's phone. Like, once you've sent a message, it's gone. It's no longer under your control. Like, it's not a thing you can worry about anymore. But your own devices, you have to keep clean. And that's where having self-deleting messages is so critical. And that's the thing that matters the most. Like, encryption is great, but not having something there in the first place is even better. That's the way to look at it.
The old Snapchat problem.
Right.
Well, in that sense, Yuliana, and I guess,
you can organize, if you can organize regime overthrow with dick pics and boobs, Snapchat is the way to go.
Hey man, they're end-to-end encrypted. Like they've been rolling out E2E for their own selfish reasons. I think Snapchat doesn't want to deal with any of the garbage that runs through their server, so they've been
They are
implementing
the
end-to-end
world's
encryption.
largest CSAM repository.
Oof.
Like Google stores so much CSAM from Snap, like we won't go into it, but just like if someone was to look for that, it would be the end of this.
The question that I would ask in relation to all this is, like, are there aspects of technology, like enablers, that you wish you had that maybe are not as easy for you guys to kind of like clobber together? Like, are there specific attack scenarios that happen to people in Belarus that you wish technology would better address? Because there's a lot of folks here that I think would be interested. What can we make for you? As you know, would
That's a very good question.
Right.
I probably would let my colleague answer.
I think, yeah, I think they're answering a different question, but yeah.
Yeah, probably. Also, I mean, we can't expose everything we kind of need because the regime, probably we can't. I don't know. I don't want to answer for them, but I know that we can't expose a lot of the, protocols or apps that we're using, just not to make it easier for the regime trying to hack Cyber-Partisans. So if you say exactly what you need, then they will understand, the big point. Potentially be a little bit paranoid about sharing information like that, but I think if it's more general, my colleague can answer about what people can create. But also, again, it also relates, I think, to your question in the beginning. You create something that then bad guys can use as well. So I think it's, again, we also understand this danger that this technology might be used. But again, you also, once you create a knife to cut your vegetables, that also can be used as a weapon. So anything can be used as a weapon. And in the end of the day, that's also a point. But thank you for asking that. I think let's see what my colleague.
I think, yeah, look, maybe putting it as what can we make for you sort of inflammatory, but I think maybe the better way to ask is, what do people on the street
I think it's not about, to be honest, I think what's actually more important, not even for Cyber-Partisans, is how to make safe internet for ordinary citizens, a very basic person that doesn't have any sophisticated knowledge about how to use even VPN, like how to create some technology that can be used by ordinary people, and yet, the regime cannot use it to spy on its own citizens. That's something I think that Western countries will be interested, but also obviously it's the point of surviving in Eastern Europe for sure, in Belarus specifically. So it's more
what
like
NFTs would be most useful in.
Did you just say NFT?
Yes, I did. Like, how about we make an NFT series called "Overthrow Lukashenko"?
Well, we are working on it. Actually, that's the first time we mean mentioning that in public. We need funds and resources specifically for protecting the servers where the information is stored, but also for creating some kind of technology that can help Belarusian. That's our main goal, right. And just to raise this kind of funds, but also, I guess, to spread out information about what's going on. Cyber-Partisans are now working on NFTs. If you have any helps, advice, spread the news, please do. That will be
help with some.
What's Belarusian for Ponzi scheme?
Oh, hey man, it's expressly treated as a donation. I think is sort of.
No,
it's for sure.
I don't know. I just think, like, in terms of what advice I would have for NFTs, that's it. But in terms of like a donation with NFTs, that's different. Like,
yeah, that's the idea behind it. But also, I think to create some cool image that people can have, and in 10 years they're like, oh, we have a cool NFT from the last dictatorship in Belarus, while we will be living in a free and a beautiful world, and all will be some stories of the past, which
NFTs
I know is very optimistic.
Mustache.
Pablo, jump in, man. I see you unmuting and muting.
No, I'm just laughing at the whole NFT thing and cool images. I like the memes are just coming forward. I'm seeing bare-chested Putin, riding a horse carrying the Ukrainian flag.
That's the NFT side for supporting.
That's the NFT, fundraising for the Cyber-Partisans.
I think the fundraising for the Russians have to be Alibaba gift cards, so they can keep buying walkie-talkies and drones and shit, right?
If you did like how to spot KGB agents, and then you just had pictures of Lukashenko's son, the guy with the like the 80s haircut and like the big ass mustache, and like he basically looks like central casting was like, give us like a 1980s KGB officer. Like that's the dude. I think that would be awesome.
So BCP has been typing this whole time. Let's pay attention to the answer more or less. I think Telegram would be
Okay, so you're asking about marketing and you have chosen the right group of people to ask. We not only spend decades working in InfoSec, we actually moonlight as a PR and marketing company. Glasshouse Design is what we were going to be called, but that is not true.
the Ridge wallet. No, I mean, I think as far as donations and everything, it doesn't take a whole lot these days to. I don't even think you need NFTs, but just to like get people to ask for donations. But like going back to the question about sort of secure technology, and it's interesting, Yuliana, because like I hear the same discussions coming out of Ukraine, coming out of folks in Russia who are better off, are in a really difficult situation, sort of discussing things. But it takes us back to what I consider the Tor problem, which was, Tor used to be a major enabler that included activism components, and that allowed people to kind of skate by under this cloud of anonymity. And I think these days, it doesn't really serve that purpose anymore, or it's expressly changed. I'm actually really curious if we're at a position where the more viable pieces of technology that can do this are like Google actually changing Chrome for everybody in a sense, or how do we enable a whole population that isn't really tech savvy, other than to try to integrate into the most basic forms that they use the internet? Like if Chrome just had an anonymity button that sends you through a GCP VPN, like sure, we can say that isn't you're sending everything to a Western collector or whatever, but you're definitely not sending it to the Lukashenko regime, right? Like there is a point at which in your threat model that you can accept one evil instead of the other.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in that sense, we need people who would lobby that or try to pressure the companies. We don't have, direct maybe routes to go and talk to Google. It's like, hey, can you do that for us? I know Ukraine, put some pressure and they were able to do that, but it, took them to actually have a war with Russia to ask for some help from Western countries that they provide now. But again, in general sense, that again, of course, will be helpful. We would love that. But I don't think we have any ways to pressure them to do that for us.
Okay. We've got one more question, which it seems to be about the what do you see the Cyber-Partisans doing after regime change? Will they disband? Will they would there be a place for them in a new regime, or would they become Cyber-Partisans Incorporated and start to
Well, maybe some will write a book or something and then talk about, all these cool resistant movements and operations. But I think the majority, they want to stay in tech. They want to rebuild the security systems. They know how vulnerable and bad they are. And, Russia will never go away from us. We are bordering with it. We will have to protect the country, first of all, from Russia or any, influence coming from the East. So in that sense, of course, you need to rebuild all the systems. That's one of the major tasks for Cyber-Partisans, to make sure it's safe and secure for all the citizens. But also a lot of them have these dreams of, building something of a Silicon Valley in Belarus. There are many tech experts, IT experts. The schools and universities are really good. So that there is a huge opportunity to, have in Eastern Europe for all these IT specialists. There will be opportunities. There are now even opportunities why the remaining OIT people, because it's been in place for some time. So something like to focus on that area as well. Maybe some will go into politics, just to make sure that the new leaders and nothing like Lukashenko, make sure that Russians didn't put money into some candidate and lobby their own person, and just in general to make sure that this sense of like liberal decentralization will work in Belarus. We need to have independent institutions. It's changing the regime won't it's not a guarantee that the new regime will be democratic. If you don't have independent institutions, really independent institutions, that the system won't change that much, because some people still be in place from the old regime. You can't just kind of get rid of them. We don't have enough experts. We don't have enough people that lived abroad, that been raised or been exposed to some better systems. So it is a difficult question, but I think that that's the notion that definitely cyber-partisans have, to make sure that the system is as fair as possible, especially during the transfer period, which is always a very shaky and very dangerous.
So,
Cool.
see,
I think we're out of time.
yeah.
Like Yuliana, we don't want to keep you longer than we need to. Tanji is already had to leave. We're gonna cheat and go like 5 minutes or so over if you've got any last words that you'd like to share with us, and BCP as well, if there's like.
Sure, I think they're also answering right now.
Yeah, they were putting
Mhm.
sort of different levels of security posture for the technology that they're assessing, which makes sense. I mean, it's what we were discussing. At some point, you like balance of probabilities, balance of issues for your threat model. It's like Western entities. We can worry about
like Amazon
later on.
Amazon, I've already overthrown one Lukashenko. I don't need to overthrow a second. Every time I overthrow Lukashenko, I end up with ads for more Lukashenkos. Like, I think you can live without that as a threat. Yes,
Well,
so if,
yeah, we understand that it's really great. We want to be on that at that level where we criticize the Western democracies and all these corporates that spy on the people, and it's so bad. Like, we would love to get to that point, but for us to get to that point, we need to use all the technology kind of available, and all these bad guys that are in a sense in the Western world, but it's still helpful and it's much less evil for us than Lukashenko and then the regime. So we kind of grateful for any help in technology, or as we discussed, NFT campaigns that can help raise donations, but also spread the word about Belarus. I know that everyone's attention now on Ukraine, but Belarus is under occupation from Lukashenko, from Putin as well. We have still Russian military on the soil. Again, they use it as, in a sense, in whatever way they want, and people are suffering. People are in prisons. People are still being tortured, and we're like Ukrainians. We want to come back to European family. We don't want to be under Russian sphere of interest. We are not part of Russia. We're a separate state. We're a sovereign state, and we want to stay there. But we also want us to, in a sense, be taken seriously, meaning we just don't want to get under influence, let's say, of just Europe, Belgium, or United States. We still want to stay independent and build our own obviously democratic system with the shared values like everyone else, but like keeping our sovereignty and independence. And just in general, I understand it's sometimes harder to take it seriously for some countries, but not to be so forgetful or just disregarding it as like, they're kind of semi-Russian state, which we are not. We're not.
So one other question: if people do want to donate or help Cyber-Partisans, do you have a URL, or like where should they go and what should they do?
We do actually. It's on Twitter. That's one of the, let me find this link. I'm going to send it to chat. Cyber-Partisans only accept not just Bitcoins, but only blockchain currencies. So let me try to find this link really quickly. We're working on some other ways how people can donate. We understand that not everyone is so tax heavy, and use, let's say, Bitcoin, but for now, that's the only way to do so. I am sharing the link.
I see that.
Also, Cyber-Partisans made a report on where all the donations go, like what they spend money on. I will also share that link so people know that it's not going on, I don't know, people's salaries even. It's mostly on protecting the servers or creating some tools for Belarusians or for data analysis and stuff like that. So the first link is the donation link, and the second one is the Twitter link on the report that Cyber-Partisans created on where the money goes.
Amazing. Well, thank you guys for all that you're doing, and like Yuliana for the time. It was great meeting you in Tallinn. It's great to see you.
Yeah, it was great meeting you too.
And also for our friend who is willing to endure terrible internet and a lot of typing and not as much attention as we could have paid, but I think the audience has been having a good time.
Thank you guys. Thank you so much for inviting me and for having my colleague as well. It's been really great to chat with you. Hopefully we'll stay in touch.
Stay safe, guys. And Greg, I don't know if you want to close us out.
Yeah, so, smash that like button, pound the subscribe, beat the bell into submission, and, don't forget to buy your Ridge wallet and your NordVPNs and Kim Zetter's newspaper, Glasshouse Cyber Hour is now going to conclude. I've
Thanks,
decided to
everyone.
rename it. So yeah, thanks, guys.